Okay. All right. People are starting to join us. So I'll say welcome, welcome, welcome. As people are coming in, please feel free to grab water, grab a notebook, grab a pen. We're just going to give everybody a couple minutes to get settled in. And we're happy you're here. I'll keep saying that for everybody who's joining now. Giving everybody just a couple minutes to get settled. So please feel free to take this second to grab a notebook and pen, a little water, a snack. Everybody's off camera, so don't worry about eating lunch during this. Okay, I'm going to start my bit since we're at 12:01 and I know we have plenty to get to. I know people are still coming in, but I will get us started by saying, welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us for this September's AudienceView September Industry Expert Webinar. My name is Casey Thomas. I am the Content and Public Relations Specialist here at AudienceView. And today I have the pleasure of welcoming Ruth Hartt, who has a rich background as an artist, educator, nonprofit administrator, with experience blending perspective shifts with actionable insights. Her mission is to bridge the gap between business innovation and the arts, helping leaders rethink traditional approaches to unlock growth and foster inclusivity. Drawing from 7 years at the Clayton Christensen Institute, Ruth's interdisciplinary expertise brings fresh strategies to drive meaningful, audience-centered change. So, without further ado, I will pass it on to Ruth. And actually, right before I do that, I'm going to remind everyone that please utilize the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen, and we actually have enabled the chat. So please feel free to pop in questions, comments. Please be as interactive as you're comfortable with. We encourage it. All right, Ruth, over to you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here today. I'm going to share my screen. All right. So again, welcome. While waiting for stragglers to join, I would love it if you would introduce yourselves in the chat. I always love knowing who's joining us and what organization you're with and where you are joining from. I am joining all of you from southern coastal Maine. We have entered the magical time of late summer and early fall. So the leaves are starting to turn and we've already done our apple picking excursion. So it's a great time of year here. And as a heads up, I am going to be inviting you to participate in the chat throughout. So definitely keep that chat window handy as we go along. And as we begin, I would like you to take a minute and think about a time in your life when you encountered something in your world, whether it was a product or maybe a service or maybe an activity or a trend, something that made you say, why would anybody want it? Why would anyone spend time on that? Why would anyone put money into that? Why would someone want that in their life? And I would love to hear from you in the chat. What comes to mind for you when I ask that question? What is something that genuinely made you question its appeal or its relevance, even though you could see that lots of other people valued it? And as you think of this particular thing, and you find yourself experiencing those feelings of dismissal or confusion or lack of interest, or maybe even disdain, I want you to consider that this is exactly how outsiders or uninitiated, or those you think of as your potential patrons, feel about going to a classical music concert or attending a theater performance, opera production, or a ballet performance. It is not familiar to them. It's not something they think fits into their life, and it's just not relevant for them. So let's talk for a minute about how hard it is to be relevant these days. Who here, tell me in the chat if you grew up having a rotary phone in your household? What about physical phone books or a set of encyclopedias on your bookshelf? I am aging myself when I say I had all of these in my childhood, but now all of these things are all relics of a bygone era. These are things that are from the era before the internet, before our world became digital. The internet has changed the game, right? Now, because of the internet, it's the consumers who hold all of the power. They collectively decide what matters. So it's become harder and harder for any organization, whether you are a for-profit or a nonprofit, to be relevant or even visible in today's global, digital, pluralistic world. Competition has increased like we could have never imagined, and nearly everything is available for free at the click of a button. Consumers are more powerful, more savvy, more informed than ever before, thanks to Google and Yelp and Amazon reviews and TripAdvisor and YouTube and TikTok. And what used to be just a phone is now a lot more. So go ahead, and if you want to drop your answer in the chat here, what are some things that the cell phone has replaced? So now we're carrying around, instead of just a phone in our pocket, we are carrying around, yes, Jackie says a camera. Yeah, Jonathan says fax, imagination, yes. Home phones, PCs, cameras, planners and calendars. Yes, you guys are, you're right on. So yeah, we've got an address book, an alarm clock, a calculator. It goes on and on and on, right? And I think the interesting thing is we still call this thing a phone. Even our language hasn't had time to catch up with all of these changes. And ironically, at least for me, that's the function that we probably use the least on this device that we carry around, right? And the point is, our reality has completely transformed in our lifetime before our very eyes. And as we navigate this dramatically changed world, any organization, for-profit, nonprofit, arts organization, whatever you are, any organization that wants to ensure a viable future must adapt in a similarly dramatic fashion. A dramatically changed world requires dramatic change. So welcome, everyone. I am Ruth Hartt. I'm the Chief of Staff at the Clayton Christensen Institute for Disruptive Innovation. I'm also an innovation strategist for arts and culture organizations over at Culture for Hire. And I want to tell you a little bit about my own journey and my own rethinking around tradition and relevance and change. So I spent nearly 2 decades in the performing arts sector as a classical musician. I was an opera singer, a choral director, and also a music educator. And for a long time, I just immersed myself in the joy of performing and making music. And I didn't think much about our audiences or about our prospective patrons. I assumed they felt the same passion for opera and classical music that I did. Or if they didn't, they should. But then as time went on, I grew more and more concerned about the state of arts funding and the number of empty seats we were seeing at our performances, and really for me, the viability of a career in opera. So 7 years ago, I made the tough decision to leave that world in favor of a steady paycheck. And by sheer luck, I landed in the world of Harvard Business School. I found myself in an administrative role at the Clayton Christensen Institute. And the Institute is a research organization. Essentially, we are a think tank that was founded by the world's foremost business thinker, Clayton Christensen. His innovation frameworks completely changed the way that I thought about audiences and audience development and marketing. And his ideas made me realize I've been doing these things all wrong in the arts sector. But at the same time, they all gave me renewed hope for the future of our sector. Now I bridge the world, business innovation in the arts. I help arts organizations rethink the status quo to unlock growth using customer-centric innovation. You may have heard me speak at the Course America conference or at the League conference in Houston this year. I have gone basically from the opera stage to the conference ballroom. And this is why I am so passionate about bringing Christensen's ideas to the arts sector. The arts have typically centered their programming and their marketing around the art itself. But the business sector has shown us over the past 2 decades that centering the customer instead of centering the product is an incredibly powerful pivot. It is the key to building a sustainable organization in today's digital, pluralistic, customer-controlled world. In fact, companies that center the customer are 60% more profitable, according to a recent Deloitte study. The problem is, the arts sector doesn't yet have a grasp on what it truly means to put the customer first. We are stuck in an approach that began in the 1800s in a very different world. And I am on a mission to change that. I want to see this sector go from merely surviving to actually thriving. And from everything I've learned at the Christensen Institute, customer centricity is the key. Here's another powerful piece of motivation to be more customer-centric. It comes from the Institute for Corporate Productivity, which has studied high-performance organizations across industries. And these are companies that consistently outperform their peers in revenue and profitability and customer satisfaction. And it turns out that a key driver of that success is a deeply embedded customer-centric culture. High-performance organizations are 3 times more likely than lower-performing organizations to collect customer data and to use it to create formal strategy. Not only that, they are 4 times more likely to set customer satisfaction goals and to translate them into actionable, measurable activities. In other words, they are measuring what matters. They are tracking goals that directly impact customer satisfaction and therefore business outcomes, rather than focusing on internal goals or less meaningful metrics that don't drive performance improvement. So I'm curious to hear from you in the chat. Have you heard of this business thinker, Clayton Christensen? Have you encountered his name? Have you encountered his ideas? Have you read any of his books? If you haven't, it's not surprising at all. 7 years ago, I myself had never heard of Clayton Christensen. It's not a name that you hear in the arts world. But at the Institute, what I discovered was that Clay was not only famous, he had been dubbed the father of disruptive innovation. And he was getting calls on a daily basis from Fortune 500 companies and government ambassadors asking him for help, asking him for advice as they worked to solve a difficult problem. Clay had written a dozen best-selling books, and he had developed several frameworks or theories that completely changed the way that business leaders and government leaders thought about innovation and attracting customers and growing sustainable organizations. So he made a huge impact on the business world. And there's one story that goes that just after one session of sitting down with Clay and learning about his frameworks, the founder of Intel went back to his company and launched new products guided by these ideas that accounted for more than $20 billion of new revenue. So these are some powerful frameworks. And they have shaped the direction of my life. They shaped my thinking in a foundational way. And I am going to share one of these frameworks with you today. As I dove deeper into his work, I realized that Clay's mission went way beyond just helping businesses make money. So these frameworks, which have been rigorously researched and tested and proven by case studies led by Harvard Business School researchers, they provide a new way of looking at the world. So they give us a lens that can tell us what causes what and why. So some of you have probably heard that expression, correlation does not equal causation. So Christensen was obsessed with finding the causation, with finding the root cause. And his proven frameworks help leaders eliminate guesswork and make decisions with more confidence and explain which strategies are likely to be successful and which strategies will likely fail. And these frameworks have helped companies in every industry create incredible growth, and that's their beauty. They can be applied pretty much anywhere. Clay knew that these frameworks were powerful enough to tackle the biggest social challenges, and that's why he founded the Christensen Institute. And at the Institute, we've been applying these ideas to problems far beyond the business world. We're using these theories to transform big problems in education and in healthcare and in poverty. But as I became more familiar with these ideas, I realized they had a great potential for impact on another industry. His work had transformed how businesses and governments solved their toughest problem, but there was this whole other sector that hadn't yet tapped into his insights. So if these frameworks had helped companies grow and innovate and attract new customers, why weren't we using them in the arts and culture sector? Because we certainly have been struggling with attracting customers in our sector, right? So we're going to talk about that for a second. We're going to talk about our audience problem. The National Endowment for the Arts has published a survey for public participation in the arts every few years since 1982. And just this past October, they shared their initial findings from their 2022 survey. So I was able to sit down and look at the data across 40 years of audience participation. And I crunched the numbers for each discipline, and here's what the data revealed. And we're going to look at the classical music sector in particular. In 1982, when the first survey went out, 13% of the US population was attending classical music concerts. Between 1982 and 2017, classical music audiences saw a pretty steady decline with a 34% drop in audiences by 2017. And this decline was accelerated, of course, by the COVID pandemic, with a total decline of 65% by 2022. So in 2022, less than 5% of the US population said that they were attending classical music concerts. Opera has fared even worse with a total decline of 77%. Ballet and theater have also had fairly significant declines as well. So I have distilled those 6 surveys into a data-packed slide deck that breaks down the numbers across disciplines and decades, including demographic trends. And if you're interested in taking a deep dive, you can scan the QR code here to take a look at that deck. But probably the most important finding in that data is this. Our current struggle with audiences did not start with COVID. It began decades ago. And after 7 years immersion in these business frameworks, I really believe that the most important thing that we can do now is ask, what does it mean to be relevant in 2024? How can we be relevant now in this digital, pluralistic, and customer-controlled world? Because it really is a myth that all consumers are sitting at home watching Netflix. People are spending time and money on the things that are relevant to them. 4 years after the pandemic, the demand for pop concerts and sporting events has really surged back. So sales for the biggest pop concerts are up 65% from 2019. All 4 major league sports had bigger attendance in their most recent season than they did in 2019. And even US movie revenue has increased 300% since the height of the pandemic. So consumers are spending an average of $131 on concert tickets, an average of $158 on professional sporting event tickets, and upwards of $30 for a movie date. But in contrast, the latest data from Impact's Experience shows us that many arts organizations are still facing significant challenges regaining their pre-pandemic audience base. And according to their research, performing arts organizations in particular are projected to reach only 5.6% of their 2019 attendance this year. So the numbers are showing us that Americans are seeing less and less relevance in arts and culture offerings. Colleen Dillenschneider's research at Impacts Experience tells us that our sector is experiencing leaky bucket syndrome, or what she calls negative substitution, across every single discipline. And in the performing arts sector specifically, every patron who leaves the market is replaced by just 0.904 people. So seeing that number made me wonder, how long would it take the sector to lose 50% of its patron base? And so to calculate this, if you use the exponential decay formula, it tells us that at current rates, if this stays the same, it will take approximately 7 years for the performing arts sector to lose 50% of its patron base. In other words, if things continue as they have, we will have lost 50% of our patron base by 2031. That is a tipping point that we do not want to reach, right? So how the heck do we turn this around? We've got this audience problem, and for many arts organizations, it feels like an unsolvable problem. And according to Clayton Christensen, it might be because we're not looking at the problem through the lens. In the arts sector, traditional categories we use to understand our potential audiences, such as demographics, might be limiting our perspective and might be leading to assumptions that hamper our efforts to attract new audiences. So let's look at this audience problem through a new lens today. Let's explore a new way to categorize our audiences. But first, we have to check our assumptions, because Christensen often talked about how important it is to question assumptions, especially when it comes to innovation and decision-making. And in his book, Innovator's Dilemma, he points out that companies can get stuck making assumptions about their markets, about their customers, about technology, and they base these assumptions on what's worked for them in the past, which can make them miss out on new opportunities or be blindsided by disruptive innovations that could spell disaster for their organizations. And we've already talked about how technology has completely transformed our world in just a few decades. But alongside this transformation, we have also experienced a major demographic shift. Today, about 50% of Gen Z identify as non-white. And this is in stark contrast to the baby boomer generation, of which just 30% identify as non-white. That is a huge shift. So our world is more diverse than ever before. And this diversity has changed the way that society thinks about what it means to be cultured. So there are two assumptions we need to rethink in light of these changes. And these assumptions stem from traditional Eurocentric perspectives that don't reflect that of today's diverse society. And the first assumption is that classical music or ballet or opera or traditional theater is the epitome of culture and refinement. This is the belief that classical music stands above all other forms of musical expression. So, for example, a Mozart aria is higher art than a Beyoncé hit. In 2024, arts organizations can no longer claim to be the arbiters of cultural value. David Brooks, writing in The Atlantic, put it this way. He said, "Once upon a time, high culture had more social status than popular culture. Now, social prestige goes to the no-brow, the person with so much cultural capital that he moves between genre styles, highbrow and lowbrow, with ease." So millennials, their successors, define culture much more broadly than any previous generation, but arts organizations, for the most part, continue to position themselves as the epitome of refinement and culture and excellence, rather than acknowledging that there are other approaches to being culture. There are alternative ways of defining and experiencing culture. And this bias can lead to the exclusion of diverse voices and perspectives. It can make certain communities feel underrepresented or marginalized. Excuse me. It can cause a disconnect with modern audiences who have varied tastes and cultural backgrounds. And ultimately, it is going to restrict attendance to that familiar historic profile, the older, white, and wealthy Americans. And as we saw from that chart a few slides ago, focusing on that particular demographic segment is going to lead us down a path that we don't want to take. So the second assumption is that our art form, whether it's classical music or theater or ballet or opera, is inherently relevant in and of itself for every consumer. We often see this assumption in the form of slogans in arts marketing that says something like, music is for everyone. And as insiders, we have seen firsthand how valuable the arts are for our lives. The data is showing us that the US consumer does not agree. They do not see that relevance. Jerry Lynn Johnson, who is a DEI consultant and a Black orchestral conductor, puts it this way. She says, the unfortunate reality is not that your community does not know that you're having a concert. It's that they don't care. And she says, that's a significantly different problem that you're dealing with. So if you think back to the complete lack of interest or the disdain that you felt for that thing that you identified as irrelevant for you at the beginning of our session, that is the substantial hurdle that arts organizations have to overcome if we want to ensure a viable future. So the question is, how do we make them care? Harvard Business Review tells us that the companies who are able to achieve a profound degree of relevance are the ones that are going to make care. But what does it mean to be relevant? I want to take a closer look at that word because it's become a bit of a buzzword. It's been so overused that it made me wonder, do we really know what it means anymore? Do we, what are the origins of this word? And I think this probably comes from my background as an opera singer and being required to translate all of my texts, right? So I could fully embody the character. So I dove into the etymology of the word relevant, and I discovered something that I thought was fascinating. The English word relevant comes from the French relevant, which originally meant helpful. And the French word comes from the Latin relevare, which means to lighten, to lift up, to free from burden, to help, assist, or comfort. So if we look at our audience problem through this lens, being relevant means shifting our focus from an inward-facing reverence of our product to an outward-facing mission where we prioritize the needs in our communities and we address those needs through our art. Another way to think about it, relevance lies at the intersection between offer and what your target customers need. That is the sweet spot. That's where the growth opportunities are. So if relevance means to be helpful, what makes art helpful? What is it about art that can be helpful for our communities? I would love to see some of your thoughts in the chat about that. What have your patrons talked about in terms of the art that has really impacted their lives and improved their lives? I think as insiders, we know that the impacts of engaging with the arts are really extraordinary, right? Yes, Alicia says it allows them to connect with others. Kimi says it provides a safe third space. Yes, excellent. Anybody else? I think what's really exciting is this emerging field of neuroarts. Yes, Richard says new perspective. Good. In the field of neuroarts, scientists are starting to actually quantify what we as artists have known intuitively all along, that the arts are astonishingly powerful. The new book, Your Brain on Art, says that the arts can literally change the structure and function of our cells. And it also says that the arts are as important to human life as nutrition and exercise and sleep. So research has proven that art improves physical and mental health. It boosts brain development and enhances learning. It lengthens lives. It fosters connection, like some of you have said in the chat. It offers a chance to unplug. It builds resilience. It creates meaning and so much more. Are we tapping into this transformative power when it comes to audience development? In your audience development work, you're probably sending out surveys to your patrons to find out what categories they fall into in terms of age and ethnicity and income level and education. You may have read the Wallace Foundation's report on millennials and how they're not a monolith. You probably analyzed ticket sales data to uncover purchase behaviors and patterns. And this information is helpful and useful, and it's valuable for funding and other aspects of our work. But the demographic approach may not be as helpful as we think for audience development purposes. These methods may not fully capture what really drives engagement. And I want you to consider a new way of looking at this. Defining your customer by demographic characteristics rather than by the outcomes that they seek is a fundamental and costly error. When we don't know what problem we're solving for our customers, it's impossible to drive meaningful engagement and sustained growth. So what would Clayton Christensen say? He would say what he often said to business leaders: you've got the category wrong. And this is the number one most transformative concept for organizations who want to grow their customer base. In the art sector, we've been working so hard to understand who our customers are and what their previous purchase habits were, all towards trying to grow a larger and more diverse customer base. We are, at this point, practically drowning in demographic data. But it's not actually helping us reverse audience declines or to thrive and grow in the ways that we aspire to. And the same approach was prevalent in the business world decades ago. And here's what Clay and his fellow researchers realized. This data isn't enough. Demographic data doesn't provide enough context for us to truly understand the customer and to be able to influence their purchasing behaviors. This data won't help us become more relevant to our communities in our now fully digital world. So let's say we have this customer. We have this white male born in the late 1940s. He's successful. He's very wealthy. He's a prominent figure in his community. This sounds like a really fantastic prospect for bringing into your world, right? Maybe not. For those of you who don't recognize this face, this is the rocker Ozzy Osbourne. You were probably expecting someone maybe like King Charles, right? Because he shares the exact same demographic profile that Ozzy Osbourne does. So does their shared demographic profile mean that we can expect them to have the same purchasing habits? Obviously not, right? Their demographic data doesn't tell us the whole story. It doesn't tell us the underlying context for why they might make a purchase. It doesn't tell us what motivates them. They live in very different contexts, so they have very different goals, and they are therefore going to be motivated to make very different purchases. And this is what Christensen wrote. He said, unless you understand the full context in which your customers are making a choice to hire your product or service, you will be unlikely to create the right offering then. He says, you will just be treading water until they fire your product and hire one that understands them better. What he means is, without considering and acknowledging the context-rich motivations of our target customers, we cannot predict or influence their behavior. We can't create products that we can be confident will appeal to them, and we can't create effective marketing that will resonate deeply with them. So Christensen and his colleagues created and tested an innovation framework that became a foundational way of understanding the world. It helps business leaders avoid bias, helps them understand what drives consumers to make purchases. It helps them design successful products and create deeply empathetic marketing. And it helps them drive powerful alignment across the entire organization. And it's a framework that tells us why we buy things. And very simple this framework. And I think this is really the foundation of a truly customer-centric approach. It is the key to avoiding the biases and assumptions through which we look at our own organization and at our world. Here it is. People don't buy products. People buy outcomes. So people don't buy products or services because of who they are. Their demographic characteristics are not what drive their purchases. People buy things because of who they want to become, or because of something they want to achieve, or because of a problem they want to solve, or a need or a struggle they have in their lives. So people don't buy products, they buy outcomes. And Christensen said, people don't go around looking for products to buy. Instead, they take life as it comes. And when they encounter a problem, they look for a solution. And at that point, they will hire a product or service to help. So what's relevant for the consumer are the products and the marketing that are addressing a problem or a need or a struggle or an aspiration they have in their lives. And when we talk about a problem or a struggle or a need, this might be a problem as small as I need a birthday present from my mom, or as large as my depression treatment isn't working. So to put this into the context of the arts sector, your target audience doesn't go around looking to buy tickets to cultural events. Instead, they take life as it comes. And when they encounter a problem, they look for a solution. And so in short, the only thing the consumer cares about is how you can help them with their problem. So here's the key takeaway for arts leaders. If you don't address real life consumer needs and contexts in your marketing and in your programming, you will not be relevant to today's consumer. To put it another way, your target customer is found at the intersection between the outcomes you provide and the outcomes that they are seeking. Meaning the ideal customer for your product or service or your concert ticket is someone whose needs and desires and goals align with the benefits or solutions that your product provides. So rather than categorizing your target customers by demographic characteristics, it's much more effective to categorize them by the outcomes that they seek. What does this mean on a practical level? If you want to resonate with a diverse audience, you have to talk about what they are about instead of talking about yourself, right? So you need to speak to the outcomes that they seek. That is how you start making them care. Unfortunately, the arts sector traditionally does not do this very well. Traditional arts marketing takes the perspective of the organization. It focuses on the product or the output. And the result is marketing that is deeply egocentric and marketing that totally ignores the customer. It doesn't resonate on an emotional level, and therefore it does not drive action for the people who don't already care about the arts. And when you compare that kind of marketing to the marketing that consumers encounter in what we call the real world, you can start see just how much we are ignoring the customer in the arts sector. When you look at the world through the biased eyes of your organization, what does marketing look like? Here's a brief list for you. You might want to screenshot this. Your content and your imagery focus on the product. There's no connection to real life. The reader is expected to deduce implicit value and relevance. The language is insider friendly, it's jargony, and sometimes worse, it's vague, and it really has no substance. It doesn't actually mean anything. You see lots of the word we and our and us. You see formal or flowery language because we are the epitome of refinement, right? So our marketing should be refined too. You see arts organizations pronouncing themselves as accessible and innovative and for everyone. That's not what consumers are necessarily looking for. So the goal of this kind of marketing is clearly to sell a ticket or score a donation. It reflects the organization's perspective and the organization's needs and goals. And ultimately, what it does is it fails to answer the question, what's in it for me, or why should I care? Which is the question that all consumers are asking these days. So let's look at the flip side. When you look at the world through the eyes of your target customer, what does your marketing look like? How is it different? Well, content and imagery focus on the customer. It focuses on the problems that you can solve for them, the struggles that they face in daily life. You see lots of images of patrons engaging with the art and non-art imagery that draws connections from the art to things that the outsider might be familiar with, such as nature or food and wine or athleticism or mindfulness. This kind of marketing helps customers see how your offerings are relevant or helpful to real life. So language is outsider friendly, very specific. There's lots of use of the word you and your. There's colloquial language. There's even maybe some emojis. And the goal with this kind of marketing is to create relevant bridges and even add value, even with just the marketing content itself. This kind of marketing reflects the customer's perspective and needs. It acknowledges that every consumer is on a unique timeline and that not everyone is ready to buy a ticket just yet. And it answers the question that every consumer is asking, which is, what's in it for me, or why should I care? So I want to leave you with some practical tools today. I think it's a really important exercise to take a close look at your own organization's marketing for signs of egocentricity or product centricity. A tool for that. I have a marketing assessment on my website that will help you identify elements in your marketing that are stuck in that egocentric, irrelevant approach. And it does require some deep thinking, so I don't recommend that you try to take it right now, but go ahead and scan that QR code if you're interested to save the link for another time. And before we move into Q&A, I do want to say, I know there was a lot of gloom and doom in this session, but I want to emphasize that I am extremely optimistic about the future of the arts sector and about the untapped opportunities that are out there. I think if we can collectively pivot from output-centered marketing to outcome-centered marketing, I truly believe that the potential for growth is really mind-boggling. If you are interested in exploring what that looks like, check out my market potential calculator, which you can access through this QR code. It walks you through what it looks like when you shift to talking about outcomes rather than just about your product or your outputs. So how does an arts organization become a customer-centric organization? I distilled all of this down into a four-step framework, which I call the GOLD framework. And this is really sort of the roadmap, I think, to becoming a truly customer-centric organization. It's all about starting by gathering customer insights, optimizing your value proposition around the outcomes that your customers are seeking, leveraging the customer journey, so creating touch points for customers at every point of the customer journey, and then making sure that you are delivering customer-focused value rather than product-focused value. So if that sounds interesting, you want to explore that more, you can check it out at my website, which is cultureforhire.com. But I do want to open the floor for some questions. And I wasn't watching the Q&A, so I don't know if any came through, Casey. So why don't I go ahead and stop the screen share and then we can dive into the questions.
Great. And nothing has come through the Q&A yet, but while everybody's gathering their questions, I have one that I jotted down when you were talking about showing the difference between the kind of outdated marketing messaging with the new the visuals and the messaging. And my head went to how many of these orgs are catering more to donor personas, because we know so many orgs are dependent on donors versus getting in those new audiences.
Yeah, and I think that's definitely part of it. And I think we're reaching a point when I look at that of the negative substitution, where that tipping point is. I think we're reaching a point where we have to stop catering to the donors and the traditional audiences that we used to cater to, knowing that our community have become so much more diverse than ever before.
Mm-hmm.
It looks like Alicia dropped something in the chat. What is the best way to find out desires of audiences if we are changing how we perceive them? That's a great question. So you can tackle this with surveys. You can tackle this with focus groups. But my really preferred way is to sit down one-on-one with customers. I think when you're one-on-one, whether it's over Zoom or phone or in person, there's openness that they get into that you might not really access in a focus group or in a survey. When you take the time to really ask them deeper questions and really kind of push them to go deeper than just talking about the art itself, into what is it that they walk away with that they didn't have before after an experience with your organization. I think that's where you start getting into what are those motivations and outcomes that they're looking for. Anybody else?
We had a question come through the Q&A from Kimmy. How do you recommend baby steps to implement this? How do you recommend baby steps to implement this? It's not so jarring for leadership and the board of directors who've been stuck in the old ways of arts marketing.
That's an excellent question. That's probably the biggest struggle, I think, for arts organization is there are folks who see the need for this shift, and there are folks that don't see the need for this shift. So I always start with data, right? So all this data that I've gathered around our audience declines and that prediction of that 50% tipping point in 7 years, that data is really kind of mind-boggling and jaw-dropping. And I think being open about where you're at in the sector and where your organization is at in terms of whether your ticket sales are sort of mimicking what you're seeing in the greater sector, I think is an important way to start. Other ideas I would have for you are maybe you start a book club and maybe you take Clayton Christensen's book, Competing Against Luck. Or maybe you take Nina Simon's book, The Art of Relevance, and you just open the conversation without starting by saying, we have to do this and we have to do it now. Baby steps would be, let's explore this book, what it has to say and what it means for our organization. So I think those are the two steps that I would recommend to take first.
Oh, Jonathan, I see that you raised your hand and then maybe lowered it. Okay, it's still up. It looks like I can allow you to talk to ask a question, so I'm gonna try that.
I think I just unmuted.
Perfect.
I hope that's all right. I didn't know whether you had to put something in or you could just raise your hand. Yeah, I'm on the board of Choral Arts New England, which up in New England supports the sort of the choral ecosystem through grant making. And every year we give out approximately $20,000 worth of grants to a variety of choruses, and there are 470 some choruses in our database, but we don't get applications from everybody. But one of our members came back from Choral America, Chorus America's conference last year or whatever it was, when Ruth, you gave your talk, and I think you may even be on this call, and was so excited about it and spread it around. And so we actually started a project. We decided to survey our choral ecosystem to find out what their leading problems were. And I fully expected, just because what you said, that the biggest problem would be audiences, but it turned out that the biggest problem overwhelmingly was getting and retaining chorus members. And then the second one after that was finding the money to keep their choruses together, and then tied with what was it? Something else was audience, capturing audience members. And so, I think so that surprised us a little bit, and we're thinking about holding some forums addressing these problems. But it turns out, obviously, that they're all interconnected. And what I'd love to hear more from you is if a big issue is getting chorus members, just in order to be able to actually do choral work, is that the same problem as getting the audience members? And can you? I mean, I assume that you would be addressing that if you're consulting with people in something like the same way you would address the issue of finding more customers.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's such a great question, Jonathan. And it actually is something I hear a lot from choral organizations. They're sort of torn between what they should sort of highlight on their homepage, right? Because is the goal to bring in audiences, or is the goal to bring in more singers, right? And I think that you're absolutely right. It's a very similar problem. I think you can think about your singers or your potential singers as customers, right? You want them to buy in to the experience of singing in your organization. And so I think absolutely you need to have a landing page targeting potential singers for your group. And you need to think about what it is that they are looking for when they sing in a group. And I'll guarantee you, it's not just the musical experience. There's always other things around that they gain from being in a choral ensemble. And so maybe you need to sit down with singers and talk to them about their experience in these organizations, and find out what are the outcomes they're getting out of being part of these groups. And that, again, can inform your marketing when you're recruiting for new singers. So absolutely, I think these principles apply.
Thanks.
It looks like we have another question in the chat here. Is defining diversity through demographic data still relevant? Art is for everyone. Is there a methodology to find out who is missing in our community that is more than the eye can see?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. Knowing who your customers are and whether they actually match the diversity that's in your community is extremely important. And numbers around diversity can be very, very helpful when you're working on grants and getting funding from donors. So it's still important information to have, right? So I always encourage organizations to continue doing the post-concert surveys that they do and that kind of thing to really understand who is attending and who is missing. I'm not sure that fully answers your question, Lalisa. So feel free to chime in if there's more to that. She says thank you, so I think we're good.
Yeah. This is a huge philosophical question that I jotted down, so maybe this is too big of something to ask, but I couldn't help but think when you were showing the chart of where people still are spending money, sports, top 40 sort of concerts. Is there research into how much this decline is traced back to the defunding of public school programs and the kids just aren't getting into the arts from that young age?
So there is a little bit of that. I think it was the NEA that has some of that data. It's also in my slide deck, actually. But it hasn't been done. So there definitely is a decline there. But there's also a huge correlation with the rise of the internet and smartphones and streaming and all of that technology that has appeared in the last 20 decades. And so, I think it's it all ties in. And I think, as I said at the beginning, it's just harder and harder to be visible in that world where everything is out there, right, on the internet. And so our job is to be able to attract their attention by really tapping into what it is that they care about in the first place and showing how our art can actually be relevant and relate to those things.
Mm-hmm. Kimmy asked another question in the Q&A. She says, my org is just getting around to implementing surveys. What are questions you find most helpful to integrate this new style of arts marketing?
Yeah, that's a great question. I should have put a QR code for this. I have a free download on my website that offers some of these questions. I would say get away from asking questions about things you aren't going to change. First and foremost, a lot of people ask questions about the venue or the repertoire or whether they thought the quality of the concert was good. And, these are things that you probably aren't going to change, especially the ticket price. Right? So what I am interested in about is how did you feel when you walked in, and then how did you feel when you left? Right? What's changed inside of you? How has this experience improved you, or brought new things to you that you didn't have before? I think you can also ask questions about, what were the outcomes you were seeking, and maybe list 10 different things, right? Was it in inner peace? Was it a chance to unplug? Was it a chance to connect with a friend? Was it, just sort of dive into what some of these outcomes might be. And that allows the consumer to think further past just the art form or past just saying, I wanted to support this organization, and really go into why, what was behind that? What are the motivations there? And I think that will provide you with some more specifics that you can then start to use to wrap your marketing around. And when you sit down with customers, or when you use open-ended questions and you get them to really, wax eloquent about what it is that they really enjoyed or took away with them, that's the kind of language that you want to copy and paste into your marketing content, because that's the kind of language that's going to be really powerful.
All right, we probably only have time for one more question. So if anyone has anything else burning, this is your chance.
Everyone's thinking deeply right now.
I think I found the link on your site to the blog post. Is it the one about if when an audience survey is all you've got, make it count?
Yes.
Okay. I'm
yes. Good job.
So if anyone else is curious, there's the link.
I'll have to make sure that is up to date, but yes, it should be there. And if you had a question, you weren't sure how to formulate it yet, or you think of something in the future, please don't hesitate to reach out. I'm on LinkedIn all the time. I'm on Facebook and Instagram, so I'm happy to answer questions that come up for you later today or in the coming weeks.
Perfect. Well, Ruth, thank you again for taking the time and joining us, and thank you all participants for being here, asking questions. I certainly learned a lot, and assume everybody else did too. And like Ruth mentioned, please find her on LinkedIn and social media and follow. There's a wealth of knowledge to be had.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for the invitation, and thank you all for joining. It's been a pleasure.
Great. Take care.